Discover how smarter project insights can lead to better project outcomes.
Hello, project people. Welcome back to a brand new episode of the Project Chatter podcast. It's always good to have you with us. And it's good to have a full house today as well. Dale, how are you, sir? I hear you're working on some pretty interesting projects at the moment.
Yeah, work's been keeping me busy, out of trouble. I can hear, and probably listeners as well, that you're traveling for work as well. So you keeping out of trouble there. But you're even more squeaky than you usually are with your little Australian accent there, Val.
Thanks, buddy. I appreciate that. There's nothing like an insult in the morning. No, I take it as a compliment. It's good to see your face, mate. And Martin's here too. How you, Martin?
Yeah, good, thanks. And yourself? Yeah, you sound a bit dodgy, but sounds like you're traveling though, so all good.
Yeah, I'm packing. I'm out of a suitcase. It's very difficult to pack a full microphone setup when you're on the road, but I have to figure something out. But look, let's get to the pod. This guy needs no introduction, Mr. Tim Creasey. How are you, sir?
Doing very well, Val. Doing very well. I actually have my first business travel coming up. I started thinking about the suitcase. I remember when in about 15 minutes, I could have 5 days in all suits, packed and ready to go to the airport. And I just packed for my first kind of family trip where there was no need to bring suits or my new shoes. It took me 3 days, and I think I forgot half the stuff I was supposed to bring. So I'm getting nervous about stepping back into business travel and living out of the suitcase again.
Yeah, it's different gear, isn't it, Tim? Like you've got to, and you actually get pretty robotic about it. You know, I've actually got an extra toothbrush, I've got extra soap, I've got extra things, but you can't take everything with you. And I was just telling Dale before we press record, in Australia, if your bag is over a certain weight, Tim, they charge you extra. So that's how they get you. So you've got to be, you know.
I think robotic is a good way to describe it, right? And before March 2020, it did feel robotic. I was traveling way too much. So it'll be nice to like recalibrate, it's one of the gifts that we'll take out of the last couple of years but yeah, I'm excited to get back into shared space with folks.
Yeah, I'm hoping we can do one of these face-to-face one day, Tim. Maybe Dale and Martin and I can come over, do a bit of a boys' trip in our suitcases, come visit you, or you can visit us, and we can do this for real. But look, we got you anyway. We love hearing your thoughts and feelings and ideas about projects, and a great subject as well around organizational agility. From your perspective, I mean, probably before we go into the detail, what's been happening in your world? You mentioned you're getting back into it. What's news since we last caught up?
Yeah, so lots going on here at Prosci, really continuing to step into the podcast space, which has been a lot of fun, taking this whole notion of change management pairs nicely with, right? I drink beer, not wine, but I understand the notion of pairing wine with food. And this whole idea that, change management, I figured out my base beat. And you all helped me get there, right? The session we did last year. The base speed I think I've arrived at is change is hard, change is continuous, change success is accessible with and through our people. So change is hard, change is continuous, but change success is accessible with and through our people. And folks in the project world, I think, like you all that have been enlightened, have been around, already been to that well, that our people is the source of where we get success in projects and initiatives. It's been really fun to take that message into other spaces as well. So go into the innovation space, go into the HR. HR is a wonderful place to go talk about the people side of change, because there's this wonderful paradox of forgetting about the people side of our changes that have to do with our people. And so it's been really kind of fun to take the base beat and take it to a lot of those different venues. So.
Yeah, that's great to hear. And I think you're right. I think there is a base to change, and our people are our best assets. And I think I was talking before we press record again that, I think Australia, UK, probably US as well, the influx of, this delay of projects because of the pandemic have now come back, and the taps are being turned back on. And I think there's some naivety in that governments and major projects are thinking if we just turn the projects on, the people will come. But in actual fact, there's not enough people to do everything at the same time. So we're kind of all wearing many hats now. I think everybody's pretty much a consultant, trying to solve things on the fly and really understand how do we get the best out of people without burning them out, which is another interesting factor, which I'm sure you will cover today. Before we get into it again, I think organizational agility, this is the topic today. What does that mean from your perspective? Because it could sound like a buzzword. Agility gets used a lot, probably, and it's not in the right way. And organizational agility, it's not a very common term. So do you mind giving us a bit of a breakdown of that?
Yeah, and actually, do you want to dive a bit into some of the definitions of organizational agility? I mean,
100%.
All right, perfect.
Let's
Well,
do it.
I'm not going to give you mine right out of the gate, because this is actually part of the conversation I'll take leaders down. Is when we talk about agility, what do we really mean by organizational agility? So I'm going to offer you up a number of definitions, and then we can talk about kind of the interesting parts of each of those definitions. So here's my first one, is going to be Random House. So we'll go right to the dictionary. Agility is the power of moving quickly and easily. Nimbleness. So there's an element of speed, right? Agility has a notion of speed and nimbleness. I remember the very first ice hockey game I went to see. And I remember being so impressed by both how powerful and nimble hockey players are, right? I think that's the last professional sport I would talk a trash to one of their athletes, right? I mean, they're just magically nimble and powerful at the same time. So that's the Random House Dictionary, the power of moving quickly and easily, nimbleness. I'll give you an organizational one, and then I'll see what you think about this one. This is from Donald Soul, McKinsey Quarterly. Organizational agility, the capacity to identify and capture opportunities more quickly than rivals do. So we'll see, are there aspects of that definition that kind of jump out at you?
Yeah, I love that. I think as well, I used to play ice hockey, Tim, when I was young, wing position. Obviously, it's the easiest one, but I actually thought it was easy. And, you don't really associate ice hockey with Australians. So it wasn't like I was a great ice skater or anything like that. But I remember seeing them on the ice, these guys, young kids as well, the ability to stop, pivot, change, definitely nimble. And I love those definitions as well. And I wanted to get into some elements of yeah, sorry, go, man.
Yeah, let me give you a couple more real quick, because I think that notion, right? Capacity to capture opportunities more quickly than rivals do. So there's the notion of out-competing, right? That we are able to do it quicker than those we're up against. PricewaterhouseCoopers gave us take advantage of change, whether planned or unexpected, without ever letting it sideline you. So I think an aspect of agility is it's something we employ on purpose when it's planned, and it's like muscle. It's an attribute that's there for us to employ when we need to, even if we didn't expect it. The Economist defined it as the ability to transform insight or information into insight in response to market movements. So there's an aspect of agility that is tied to attunement, right? The ability to be paying attention to the right things to be paying attention to, so we can anticipate what's coming down the pipe. Hassapel and Lee gave us the result of integrating alertness to changes with a capability to use our resources in responding to those changes in a timely, flexible, affordable, relevant manner. So we're now, I think what Hassapel and Lee add is being tuned into what's coming and being able to respond with our resources in a way. Daryl Connor, one of the great grandfathers of change management, he talked about the nimble organization. He calls it one that has a sustained ability to quickly and effectively respond to the demands of change while continually delivering high performance. So agility is not haphazardness, right? It's not just schizophrenic where we bounce all over. It's the ability to maintain high performance while responding to what's coming at us. Accenture gave us an always present ability to manage multiple complex portfolios of change. And I think the part of that definition I like is that it's in our DNA. You don't rent agility like you can rent data-based architecture, maybe, right? Agility is part of who we are. It's not just something we do. And then I4CP had a really nice definition. It's the 3 A's: anticipating change, adapting and responding to change, and acting on the opportunity by exploiting change. So give you a rundown, because Val, I think, right, there's a lot of these different facets. It's part of who we are, it's attunement, it's speed, it's employed and deployed. But it's, I think in the end, it's who we are as an organization, not something we're just doing right now. So it's an attribute.
Yeah. And just on that, I think and it makes sense. There's great definitions there. I haven't heard all of those. They're really, really good. I'm gonna have to read them further. But what about the ability to handle change? You know, that ability to have agility, There you go. And that point of, is it innate or is it something that can be learned? I just wanted to see from your perspective, because maintaining high performance whilst crazy things are happening, everything's changing in front of you. I see that as a bit of a skill from my perspective.
Yeah, certainly. I think back in 2009, actually, we did quite a bit of development around change portfolio management, kind of above and beyond project portfolio management, to add the cumulative and collective impact on the people in the organization. And we defined change saturation in a unique way in there, Val, and it's going to tie into this. We said change saturation is a function of two things, not one thing. It's a function of change capacity, how big your bucket is, and change disruption, how much water is going into the bucket from how many different sources and how much water sets residing in the bottom of the bucket. And so disruption is what we can start to make sense of with portfolio management, right? Understanding the moving parts and interdependencies. Capacity is that, how big is your bucket? And I think each of us individually have a different bucket size for how much change we can handle and tolerate, what's in our sweet spot. And then different departments, teams, organizations have different amounts of change they can handle. There was a movie with Ben Stiller and Jennifer Aniston. Is anybody here the movie buff? He's like a risk actuary, right? So you can imagine this guy minimizes all risk in his entire life. He's Ben Stiller being a risk actuary. Jennifer Aniston is like everything is up and down. There's no plans. Everything's always changing, right? And of course, it's this goofy romantic comedy. But some of us are like either of them. If things are too stable and nothing's changing, we get really uncomfortable. Like, not enough is changing. Other of us, my wife describes me as Pavlovian. She's like, it's so crazy you teach change, because if anybody got to watch you cook, they would just roll their eyes, because every ingredient goes up in the order it's going to get used. It gets put back in the order it gets used. Like, she'll mess with me just by moving a couple of ingredients on the counter, right? So I'm a little bit more like Ben Stiller, maybe, in my personal life, that actuary risk mitigator. So Val, I think what we can do is create context and situation where it's okay to be more risky. And I think that's one of the things we can do to encourage folks that have a smaller container for how much change they're comfortable with, to step a little bit further out. So what about you two? Are you risk? Where do you land on the spectrum? Do you?
I think if I to go on behalf of everyone, I'd say Martin's probably the most risk averse out of the three of us. I'm probably somewhere in the middle, quite measured, I'd say, and Val is just out there, just the next shiny thing, right? That's where Val is. He's like an ostrich, like shiny. I want to eat it.
Yeah. Like there's ask for forgiveness rather than permission, right? Or the 100%. People that make sure we validate permission 3 or 4 times just to make sure they're sure what they gave permission for, right? There's that whole spectrum that we all live across. So. And you know what? Maybe it's certain times call for certain approaches, right? I'll bet you in your projects, there's times where we need more Val, and there's times where we need more Martin, given the nature of the change, the nature of the project, time of the project.
Yeah. So just coming back to your buckets analogy there, and you spoke about making it smaller. I'd assume that by that very same notion, we could make it bigger as well to cope with potentially more disruption, both individually and as team size. Now, those listening in would probably be quite interested to go, Tim, okay, what are the tools? How do we increase the size? What do we do? Is there a step-by-step guide? Are there things we can practice? What should we be telling our teams? What should we be telling ourselves? What do we do?
Yeah, I think, and it's tricky, right? Because part of it is how do we help the bucket to get bigger? And so we can talk about culture, perceived need for change, structure, history, and how we kind of process some of those things. A lot of times there's also gunk in the bucket. And I think that's actually where we have a huge opportunity to create additional capacity in the organization, is reduce some of the gunk that kind of builds up in the bucket. It's not so much that there's too much going on, it's that there's just enough going on, but it's not being packaged, communicated, sequenced, organized in a way that we can actually discern and make sense of it. So sometimes I do think we complicate the portfolio itself, and allow some of that muck to actually consume capacity that could be allocated elsewhere. On the individual level, I mean, I think this is kind of like an individual personal deep dive, right? That we could start to dive into in terms of how do we manage our own finite calories and capacity. There's a book called The Subtle Art of Not Giving an F by Mark Manson.
Yeah.
Great book, right? And my analogy, and I don't think he uses it in the book, is that we each have a bag with a finite number of F's in it to give. Like, I only have so many F's to give. And the challenge for a lot of folks, especially the agents of change in organization, is they allocate, they'll give it to every single thing that comes across their desk. That's the kind of person they are and how they're wired. The challenge becomes when you run out, that bag's empty, and now something big and meaty comes across the desk. And we no longer have any F's to give it. So one of the ways at Prosci that we've been working over the last 6 months, so now looking into kind of the leadership work we're doing at Prosci, but I think it's probably going to be valuable for your listeners, the hidden cost of saying yes. The hidden cost of saying yes is something that I've been trying, especially kind of in my role, right? Leading innovation and development. I can say yes to something, but there's a huge potential wake that gets left, either on purpose or on accident, if I were to say yes to something, if I were to allocate time and energy to something. And so we're working across the team to start to be more thoughtful of what are the hidden costs of me saying yes to this? Who else gets to pick up some of the baggage and some of the effort and energy associated with this yes I might be tempted to say. So maybe we can increase our bucket, but one of the things we're working on hardest right now is just reducing the disruption going into the bucket.
Yeah, that's interesting you say that. I've had so many conversations, including Martin and Val, around, when the guy at the top in the boardroom says yes, what is he actually saying yes to for the tens of hundreds of staff, that has to go away and actually do the work, he or she, they don't often know. And that's a scary thought if you think about it. So yeah, I'm glad you bring that up, so those listening, can put some thought to that actually. But I wanted to.
I used to make a joke.
Go ahead, John.
Along these lines, just to build this out a little bit, Dale. I used to make this joke about who in the organization actually understands everything that's in the portfolio of change. And it's that poor guy at the front line who came in and opened his calendar. And he looks at his calendar this week and he goes, oh my gosh, Project A launches Monday morning. There's a training for Project B on Monday afternoon. I'm double booked on Tuesday with a focus group for Project C plus a quarterly review. You're exactly right that the leader who said yes to all those doesn't even have visibility today into what that portfolio looks like as compared to the calendar of the person on the front line. And so elevating that perspective of what that portfolio means and what does it mean when we do say yes to those things. There's one more wrinkle as well, which I think is a wrinkle in time. If you want to talk about time traveling from a project manager perspective, let's say this project is launching next Monday. When did the sponsor actually say yes to this project? 2 years ago?
Yeah.
The project team said yes about 18 months ago when they got enlisted, and they've been working, right? And so we at Prosci, we talk about the current, transition, future states of change of any particular project. We pay our senior leaders to live in the future state. We pay our project teams to live in the transition state, and everybody else in the organization who's about to get touched by this change is living in the current state. And so on Monday is when they start to find out. And so, yeah, bringing all these into view is, I think, how we get more agile as organizations.
Yeah, that's interesting. And just coming back to your team concept with the buckets again, because I'm fascinated by this, you know, the bucket, the disruption is the water, the gunk at the bottom. I'm really fascinated around that image. Do you need someone to also be, if that bucket was an individual, it was a team, do you need someone to be the change master, the change leader, the bucket master? I don't know what to give this person a name, to actually control and identify and understand what's going in, whether it's, you know, crystal clear water, and how much volume's going in versus if it's gunk, and if the gunk's coming out or if the water's coming out, and if the size is bigger or smaller. Do you need someone equipped with that? And how do you identify the right person for that?
Yeah, this is exactly kind of that role, the change portfolio manager, that we're starting to see organizations bring into the mix, usually working in conjunction with like a project portfolio manager. Because you're right, we can try to make the bucket bigger, and growing change management capability in the organization is one of the ways we can do that. We can also manage all the water that's going in. And so if we were to think about the water going into the bucket as the disruption created by a change, let me give you scenario A and scenario B. In scenario A, we send out an email on Monday for training on Tuesday for go live on Wednesday. That's all the more preparation we do for the organization for this change. Think about how much water that puts into everybody's bucket. Now think about scenario B, the exact same change. But early on, senior leaders began talking about why now, what if we don't? Then people managers came on behind that and started to fulfill their role of coach and advocate with the direct line. Timing was delivered such that people had enough time to build knowledge, that knowledgeability gap, to fill it with practice, so that when go live happened, people felt prepared, equipped, and supported to be successful. Those take up very different amounts of water in your bucket, right, Dale? So intentionality with helping prepare, equip, and support our people on a particular project actually makes it less disruptive and take up less water. And then the role of the portfolio manager is, how are all of these sources of water coming in together? This is usually a pretty mature organization in terms of how it's optimizing the portfolio. It's kind of evolved past visualizing and managing the portfolio and really stepped into optimizing the portfolio when they're operating at that level.
So, okay, that's great. And you've seen a lot. So do you have, I mean, you don't have to give names away. Do you have any examples of sort of poor practice and good practice, and what that meant in real terms, without, you know, like I say, naming too many names?
Yeah, I'll give you a couple of examples. I think in terms of one of the patterns between poor and good practice, I think the first pattern would be scope. I know scope is something we're pretty used to in the project world. I've watched clients step into this error, and that's scoping the portfolio as every change going on in the organization. And sure enough, that is the true change load happening in the organization. But if we want to wrap our arms around the portfolio such that we can actually more effectively sequence, govern, align, pull apart, connect, share resources, we need to scope the portfolio in a meaningful way such that we can have impact on it. So the clients that I'm watching do a better job with portfolio management are scoping it around, maybe it's a particular IT set of changes. Maybe it's a strategic portfolio of change. Maybe it's in a particular market or division, but they're not the very first step to effectively managing the portfolio of change is scoping the portfolio as something we can actually wrap and then have impact on. So I think that's one of the practices. Allowing perfection to get in the way of progress. I think is one of the big challenges when it comes to portfolio saturation, this whole agility concern. I keep telling people, because, you know, for 15 years, probably one of the most common questions I've been asked is, what's the measure of change capacity? Like, isn't there like an arm cuff you could put on the organization and pump it up and say, this organization has 32 iotas of change capacity. Presently, they're only using 29 iotas of change capacity. It's not that simple, right? They're just, organizations are dynamic living systems, so it just isn't that simple. So what we can do is start to triangulate how much change is going on, how well are we doing with it, and then see what those two pieces kind of come together and show us. So we had one client, they were small enough, they had scoped the portfolio small enough that they were able to track the number of initiatives going on and milestone adherence. So those are the two numbers they just kept looking at. Month over month over month, number of initiatives underway, milestone adherence. And they were able to arrive at a numeric value that once we hit about this many projects, milestones start to slide. So they're sort of empirically arriving at how many iotas of change they have. But we usually, when we step into the portfolio space, it's really around adding the cumulative and collective impact of the change on the people in the organization, because start date, stop date, project manager, milestone is interesting. What day is it going to disrupt people so that we can make sure that they have the capacity they need to step into it? That's what we try to add with that portfolio lens.
Was that approach successful out of interest?
What's that?
Was that approach successful, the way that they managed it? Did it work for them? Or?
Yeah, it helped them get a sense for how much they could handle. Now, mind you, not all projects are the same, right? You could have 30 projects that each had this much disruption on how people did their jobs, and you could have one that has this much. And so we start to add that element into the way we manage the portfolio. But it gave them a sense, and if anything, it gave them some things to pay attention to. How much change is going on and how well are we doing at them? Because those things are probably related, right? One question I've asked on stage more than any is, how many projects are going on in your organization? I'll do this up on stage with like a data collection mechanism, so it's on screen. Do you know what the two most common answers are?
No,
you can guess.
Give them to us.
I don't know.
We have no idea. Yep, that's the most common answer. And way too damn many is the second most common answer. So
wow. Anytime
we can start to make some sense of the change load, I think we're advancing how that portfolio is going to get managed.
Yeah. So Tim, just to pivot slightly, pivot's a bit of a buzzword, but there we go. We'll use it. So Eddie Obeng we've had on before, and he compares what's a change versus what's a transformation, and in his definition, a change is sort of just you're changing the state of something, but transformation is like it's from a caterpillar into a butterfly. It's truly something different. And I don't know if you have a comment on that or not, but I was then thinking also that this buzzword, or it's been around for a while, digital transformation is happening whether you like it or not. And so that there again, transformation pops up. And I know you have views on this as well. So let me just stop there and let you comment.
Yeah, I think do you want to start at digital transformation and then kind of back into it? Because I think we'll get to kind of the definition of transformation there. I think for a lot of years, folks were obsessed with the digital revolution, but hadn't really stepped into the digital transformation. And what I mean by that is the digital revolution is the technology that it's the enabling technology, right? So I use the example of the automobile. The automobile was a technological enabler, but the true transformation, the fundamental shift in who we are as beings enabled by this thing, was personal mobility, right? The car let it happen. Personal mobility was the fundamental shift in the fabric of who we are. And in the same way, we got really enamored by zeros and ones and mobile and networks. My question that I've been posing for a number of years is, what are the fundamental shifts in the fabric of who we are as people and organizations and teams that are actually going to happen as a result of all those zeros and ones, and that the technological revolution that predicated this now digital transformation. I've also talked quite a bit about what I call the involuntary digital transformation, because I think a lot of technology leaders were yammering on about digital transformation, and then we all made it happen in a day and a half, which I think is in and of itself pretty fascinating, right? And I do this thought experiment with folks. At Prosci, we moved fully remote in a day and a half, and then pivoted a fully in-person training business to a fully virtual instructor-led training business in 2 weeks.
Wow.
The thought experiment I give people is, what if as leaders, we would have given the organization 30 days, not in the face of a global pandemic, to pivot everything remote? Like, what do you think how would that have played out?
Yeah, we need timelines. We need to sit together, come together. It's going to take us. We can't do it. There's all these challenges. But just on that note as well, Val and I were saying, imagine just before the pandemic, you're the guys behind MS Teams, right? Developing at Microsoft. And it wasn't a great product at that stage. Boom, pandemic hits. Imagine now you just need to grow in size and you need to create a product that's like not half baked, It's crazy.
And they were rolling out to huge government deployments, right? Numbering in the hundreds of thousands. We at Prosci, I had a buddy who's an IT guy. And so he had turned me on to Teams about a year before that. And so I consider us we had early started to lean into the collaboration. It was interesting because it gave us the plumbing to connect, but we still had a lot of learning to do about how to actually work together virtually, right? But I think you're right, Dale. Had we given everybody 30 days, at the 180-day mark, we would have checked in and realized we were already, 5 months late, 3 times over budget. We'd come up with 30 different reasons it was impossible. But then it happened. So I guess I'm curious from your all's perspective. I mean, you've been in the tech space for a lot longer and more deeply than I have. Like, did you see something happen because we had to? I'm talking to clients that are talking about like a 10-year speed up of their technology roadmap, right?
Yeah, I think a certain element is out of need, just because we had to. But a lot of it, I think, from my experience in the teams I worked with, you had the one, I think you had a foundation there already where people were used to using technology, but 2, the speed of adoption was hugely around behaviors as well, because we want to as well as we need to, because the need can be there, but if you don't want to do it, it will never happen, right? So, yeah. But look, I'm going to bring Martin into comment first on that as well, because he's the youngest here, I think, and so he's the tech guy effectively, just because I'm an ageist. But then also to bring in his section of Machine Gun Martin after that, Tim, which you missed out last time.
Maybe the youngest, but probably the most Luddite out of all of us. So before the pod, you listed some of your 12 conditions shaping the future of work and change. Are you able to talk about some of these? And there's a couple I'd quite like to focus on because they sound quite interesting. Same storms, different boats. Paradoxical humanity infusion in 2D. That sounds interesting.
Yeah, very good. So yeah, Martin, I had chatted in, these are a dozen conditions that are shaping the future of work and change that we've sort of identified over the last 2.5 years working with organizations that have been navigating this. And I describe them as conditions because I'm not prescribing anything here. I'm trying to describe what I am seeing happen in the connective tissue of organizations, in the inner workings of projects, because I think those are the things we must incorporate and adapt to as we step forward. So I'm going to do the first one I'm going to do for you is that paradoxical humanity infusion in 2D. So paradoxical humanity infusion in 2D. And the way I describe this is, when we all went from sharing space to being apart, we expected this huge vacuum of humanity out of the organizations, right? Just sucking the humanity out of the organizations because we weren't having coffee and running into each other at the water cooler. But the paradoxical thing that happened is you began looking into the living rooms and listening into the symphonies of the lives of all of your coworkers. And so now in the middle of that project update, you got to hear the 11-year-old screaming about their math homework. And that's humanity getting pumped into the connective tissue of the organization. We began empathizing and connecting with the people we worked with on a human level that we didn't have to when we only walked past them in the hallways. Even the notion of parity in communication, right? You think about presenting to a board of directors, and let's say it's one of those very stodgy board of directors, right? And there's a whole pomp and circumstance of them being raised up behind mahogany desks, and you're in a spotlight and they're dimly lit. Now we're all on Brady Bunch screens. So it was a level of parity that came into how we even communicate and connect with one another, and leveling of some of the playing fields that physical space kind of contributed to before. So that's that paradoxical humanity infusion in 2D. The result of that, the immediate result of that, is the people side of organizations and the people side of change cannot be unseen. So we've spent 2 decades talking about how you can't ignore adoption and usage. You can't just turn on a solution and hope everybody adopts it. That became blatantly clear when the adoption of the solution was necessary for us to even be able to connect with one another and communicate with one another. And then the one that you had mentioned first is this idea of same storms, different boats, right? Collectively around the globe, we navigated a same storm. It was a global pandemic. But it became very apparent how very different each of our boats were. Whether that's a country boat or an individual boat. And again, when you're listening to the symphony of your coworker's life in the background of a project update meeting, you see the different boats that each of us come through. So again, that same storm, different boats is the condition that we are all stepping into 2022 with, that will influence the way organizations interact with one another and how we implement change inside those organizations.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, that's that really brings it to life. One of the other ones was de facto resilience. Is that something that's changed much as a result of the pandemic?
Yeah, and I'm going to actually pair that one and the one above because I think it shows up in this organizational agility and this portfolio conversation. Forced prioritization and de facto resilience are 2 of those conditions. I think there are things that every single one of us got, whether we liked it or not, as a result of this global pandemic. Forced prioritization is that notion that we all stack ranked. You spend 2 months locked in your room with nobody else and you stack rank what's important, right? All of us had an element of prioritization and reshuffling of what mattered when we had a lot of things we leaned on and expected taken away from us. And then the second one I call this de facto resilience. Whether we liked it or not, we earned a bit of resilience stripes over the last 2 years. And that story comes to life. I was speaking to somebody who was on my Return to the Workplace Advisory Board, and we were talking about the Great Resignation. Here in the United States, we're seeing tremendously high attrition rates, people moving around. I'm not sure, I see heads nodding, so that apparently is something that we're all running into, at least in the UK and Australia. He said, imagine I've got this guy on my team, and in February of 2020, just before the pandemic, he's hating his job. And he's ready to move on, but he thinks to himself, do I have it in me to go looking for a new job? He's like, I just don't know if I do, right? Now that same person 2 years later, February 2022, hating their job, they think to themselves, do I have it in me to go look for another job? And they think, I just survived a 2-year pandemic locked with my family in a room. Looking for a new job? That sounds easy compared to what I just navigated, right? And so that de facto resilience is the notion that we made it through. It hurt. There were bumps, there were bruises. We lost a lot of people, But those of us who are here have earned some stripes of having all collectively navigated that same storm, although it was a different journey because of the different boats that we were all in. So that's forced prioritization and de facto resilience. Those are some of those like gifts that we hope we take forward with us, right? Things that I hope stick with me is the prioritization in my life that I've been able to do, and I did over the last 2 years.
Nice.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Fantastic, Tim. I really like this boat idea, and from my perspective as well, being in Australia, we certainly saw the Great Resignation. I think what it did force in terms of prioritization, if from my perspective, was values. People's values changed. So there's like, Tim, do I really want to come into an office 9 to 5, work 5 days a week for a job that doesn't really care about me? Or should I chase something that I've thought about in the back of my mind for the last 3, 5, 10 years that kind of won't, okay, I might not get the same amount of money or whatever it is that you value, but it's going to give me pleasure. It's more meaningful to me. I can contribute more. So we're seeing not just a great resignation. They're not just jumping from one project to another. They're going, I don't want to do projects at all. I'm going to be a gardener, and I might do an online store and maybe some of these other gig economy type roles. I've seen this a lot, actually. It's very bizarre. And these guys and girls aren't, young. They're middle aged, and they got bills and the pressures of economies. So it's actually a really interesting response to the pandemic. As you said, it's kind of given them this pain threshold increase their size of their bucket a bit. They can actually take on a little bit more, but in a different context. I don't know if you've seen that in the US or even Dale in the UK. Tim, you go.
Yeah, I was gonna certainly, right. I do think you're watching folks step out of comfort and into change, maybe more frequently, and maybe that's because comfort got taken away. But I was going to ask you, I'm curious, like, I wonder if it's that brakes were taken off, like something was inhibiting me from doing it before, and that brake has been removed, or was fuel added to the tank, right? I'd be curious if it was the removal of a barrier or the additional accelerant.
I'll tell you, the application of the brake removed is probably people coming back to work. You mentioned the return to work policy, and I guess we're in a position where people don't want to come back to the work, not in a full-time capacity. Guys and girls do not want to be in the office 5 days a week. And the language that's being used by governments and agencies and clients and ourselves is, well, we want to reconnect, but we also want to keep some of the change that got us through the pandemic, but is actually now quite interesting, quite comfortable, quite rewarding. You can be home with your kids. As you said, your boat's different from everyone else's, but you've got a life outside of your work. And, isn't it great that 2-3 days a week, Tim, you can be rolling out of bed, doing your own thing for the morning. You're all chipper, no commute, and then get straight into the flow of work, which is actually really productive, I think. But then from time to time, you can still come in. So I think that's where the brakes have been taken off. We haven't been able to do that forever, really. I've never seen this. It's been talked about, 4-day work weeks and working from home, hybrid situations, always been talked about, never actually instrumented, because the force of change wasn't big enough. The incentive wasn't big enough. Now we got the opposite problem. We need more people in the office, and there is some of that change there in the breaks. But I'd be keen to think what Dale also has experienced over the last couple of years.
Yeah, you're right, Val. It is interesting because my biggest thought was everything we've just spoken about, Tim, you went through the list with Martin, that de facto resilience, how people have changed as a result of this forced, environment. How do then organizations and leaders react to that? Because some have got it right, but a lot have got it wrong. And as a result, not just, from a personal perspective where you go and say, right, I want to be, I'm resigning because of whatever personal reasons, because companies haven't reacted the right way. then you're seeing people leave as well. And so I wonder, what's the lesson not for individuals, but for organizations out there?
Yeah. What's one of my favorite quotes right now, and it'll parlay right into this, is answers have a shelf life, questions can last a lifetime. And so, first of all, anybody that's running around with answers to what the future of the workplace is going to look like, that stuff is going to be outdated by the time they get the answer out delivered. To be leaders in this new environment we're stepping into, what we need to do is arm ourselves with questions that we can ask and answer and re-ask and re-answer and re-ask and re-answer to continue to ensure that we're building that future of the workplace. So I've got a bunch of questions. You want some of my favorites?
Yeah, go for them.
When and where does the where actually matter? Where does the where that something happens actually matter? Because I heard what Val was describing was intentionality around the use of space. The office used to be where I had to go to do work, and it's no longer that. So there needs to be purpose for why I go there. So when and where does it matter that we share space, and when and where does it matter less that we share space? So I had a university on my return to the workplace advisory board, and they were talking about which classes to bring back on site and which to leave off campus. And this was like fall of 2020. Anatomy lab. Does the where matter? Right? If you're taking anatomy lab, the where matters. You can't do that on the kitchen table. 18th century French lit. Not so much, except for those two group projects where we come together to share and grow. And so, Dale, I'm stepping in with leaders and teams and saying, what of our work is more like anatomy lab? What's more like 18th century French lit? Does it depend on equipment? That's more like anatomy lab. Do I only need access to the network? That's French lit. Are the materials important? Within a project context, project kickoff, does the where matter for kickoff? Absolutely. The 12th update of 16 in a row, does the where matter as much? Not so much, right? So intentionality around when and where the where matters. So our CEO at Prosci, we're starting down this path of welcoming people back into the office more intentionally. And he's positioning the office as a collaboration hub. It's not where we have to go do work anymore. It's a collaboration hub, and that's how we're going to envision it and bring it to life. And so when and where does the where matter? What did we do since February 2020 that we would have told you was impossible in January 2020? What have we done since February 2020 that we would have told you was completely impossible before that? Because Val, that helps us identify the new capabilities that we grew, whether we wanted to or not, that we should continue to fold forward into. We hosted a global all hands meeting and had an 1.5-hour session where everybody from Prosci around the globe was there together to listen to a client success story. We couldn't have done that prior to the pandemic. We just didn't have the capacity, technology, the will. Now it was like that, right? Once you find the time. So, and what did you miss most while we were apart? Because if we can identify what we missed most while we're apart, we'll have a better idea of what to amplify when we have that shared time together, right? So those are just a couple of those kind of first questions we start to ask. So.
They're great questions, and I agree with your sentiment around answers having a shelf life. I think there is somewhat of an expiry, and it's arguably, I think you probably see it because you go to lots of projects like I do, and the questions are the same. I've been doing this not forever, but I've been doing this almost 17 years now, and the exposure is the questions are the same. The context might be a little bit different. The projects are completely different. I can go from defense to social infrastructure to anything else in between, and the same challenges and questions are there. So I was going to ask you just in the last, because I'm just looking through some of these conditions and they're fantastic. We will share them with the listeners. when we started out in the pandemic, we started, reacting. Then we said, right, we need a plan. Then became a response. Now we're evolving, and we're moving forward, where it's changed us forever. That transformation that you mentioned, Dale, from Eddie obeying, this is truly a transformation. We've kind of adopted these ways of working, these ways of living. We've significantly changed the ways we look at work. As you said, those spatial parameters aren't there anymore. The parity of the boardroom, I love that analogy. That's actually real. I've seen that. You've leveled the organization. The accessibility is there. You can speak to people that you've never spoken to before in the organization. The empathy is there too. As you said, there's kids jumping in. I had a board meeting review with someone yesterday, and Spider-Man was standing right next to him. I just had to let him know. I said, Spider-Man is next to you guys. That's my son. He's got corona, but he won't leave.
And do you remember the YouTube video right before the pandemic? It was a British newsman, I think, and he was giving an at-home news story. Yes. And the little kid comes running in, the toddler, and mom is like army crawling across the room, and the sheer terror of that being an event. And you're right. Now you're in a board meeting. You're like, Spider-Man just came in. Yeah, he's got to get something, right? I think there's something beautifully human about that.
I do too.
Personally, like there's something, because I'm the guy that always got in trouble if there's kids that came on a meeting. Like my CEO has daughters that are, elementary school. As soon as Kate comes in, meeting's over. Like, because Mr. Tim and Kate are there to have a conversation about whatever she was drawing. Like, it didn't matter if we were reviewing board meeting numbers. Once Kate got there, we were there to talk about whatever she was drawing that day. And so, God, there's something so beautiful about that if we can figure out how to pick it up and amplify it and bring it forward, right?
Well, I think everyone who's listening, if they could take some of those questions, what did we do in Feb that was impossible in January as an example? And even attire, what we wear has changed somewhat. I mean, if you're investing in tracksuits in January, you would have made a killing in February because everyone was wearing casual gear. And there seemed to be some level of acceptance now, even in work, that won't go back. So if you're at home and you're wearing a t-shirt or a hoodie, that's okay. You could be in executive meetings or with clients, Tim. Now, that never used to happen. Never, ever, ever. You had a tie or at least a collar shirt. Maybe you had a jacket on or blouse. It's actually a really interesting list. And I think I have to go back now, Tim, and I'm sure Martin and Dale will, and just think about all the things and have a bit of gratitude about it as well, that we have survived through this and we are kind of hopefully we are on the other side of that. And now we can evolve. But from your perspective, I mean, what does the future look like? Do you see this continuing to shift and change and evolve, or do you see us kind of settling down into this being the new Henry Ford model in terms of the way we work?
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine that there's going to be a regression back to the office being the place we have to go to do work. And to circle back to Dale's question about transformation, I like to talk about music, money, and work, kind of under this bucket. Music, money, and work, right? Because the digital transformation touched them very differently. So you think about money first. There was a point in time where you had to have it to spend it. And you had to have it on you. And at one point, it was a goat. And then it became paper currency because we invented that as an easier way to transport it. But you had to have it on you to spend it. And then through digital transformation, as long as you had a card in your pocket that gave you access to it, you could now spend it. Take music. You used to have it to play it. The vinyl, the 8-track, the cassette, the DVD, and then the digital transformation made it so that you could enjoy the music if you had access to it. You didn't have to have physical proximity, possession of it. But work was slow down that transformation. Certainly there have been remote workers for a long time, but you're right, Val, it was the pandemic that triggered the actual stepping into that transformation that Dale asked about, where we were able to truly disconnect place from work in a way that had been enabled to have happened for a long time, but we just didn't. There's a bunch of reasons why, right? Organizational trust, I don't know if they're going to be working if I can't see them, right? Like how much of that underpinned was one of those breaks to the transformation that we had in front of us in terms of workplace. What I hope to see, Val, as we go forward is intentionality. That's the word I'm going to kind of bring forward over and over and over. There's no one right answer for any organization in terms of the balance of on versus on-premises work. Hybrid by schedule is going to work for some. Hybrid bespoke is going to work for the others. We're balancing personal preference with organizational necessity. What I hope is we're making heads-up decisions along the way, that we are intentionally making the best choice to set the organization, the project, the team up to get the best outcomes that we need. And so, Val, as Prosci steps into defining our future of work, we began by defining our philosophy, our 7 philosophies of what we believe. One of them is we believe we can do anything from anywhere. We just proved it. And the next one is we believe gathering matters. And it's the ability to juggle both of those and be intentional about both, I think, is what's going to help organizations navigate what they have in front of them. So.
Fantastic. Absolutely.
I love it, Tim. When you're releasing your book with the terminologies, the quotes, I think last time, correct me if I'm wrong, I think you said, you want to start a business that's got a slogan, all the solutions without results, or something to that effect. And that stuck with me. And today I've written so many down as well. I love it. You're such a great storyteller. But hey, look, we got to make some time for the features.
Okay.
And Martin tells me he's struggling there a little bit with his mic. So I'm going to jump in for him. And I think we took you through this last time. So it's a bit of fun at the end, right? So the one I'm going to go for, are you ready? You know how defend the indefensible works? Did we do this with you last time?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think I remember this one.
Yeah.
He's a pro.
So you got 30 seconds to defend something that's ridiculous. And it's a bit of fun. So you got to argue for the statements I'm going to read out, right?
Yeah.
You ready, Tim?
Yep.
Okay. So defend this. I don't want to be nimble. I prefer to keep things the way they are.
I don't want to be nimble. I prefer to keep things the way they are. Now, this is an interesting one because I can sympathize, right? The way things are known. The way things are comfortable. And even when they're painful, they're known. I know how things are today. That thing that I don't know, that's scary. And it's going to be mucky and messy to get there. And this payoff that you're promising me in the future, it's still out in the future. So while I appreciate being nimble sounds fun and interesting, I think I'll just sit here in the comfort of how things are today.
What a professional. Eh? If we had the sound effects of the round of applause, or if we had an audience, I mean, you used to audiences. You can just picture it. Amazing, Tim Creasey. Thank you so much. Look, before we let you go, there is one more. It's called Fiverr. You did go through this last time, but we have switched the questions up. So 5 quick fire questions if you're ready.
Yeah. Fiverr. Here we go. Cool.
Question 1. Steak, seafood, or salad?
Steak, seafood, or salad? Seafood.
Question 2.
Yeah, a great scallop. I can't pass up a great scallop on a menu.
Nice. Question 2. What are the 3 must-have behaviors you look for in successful project teams?
Must-have behaviors. Curiosity, tenacity, and humor.
Nice. I like the humor bit. Question 3. What is one piece of advice for people new to the project profession?
One bit of advice to people new to the project profession. One of my favorite movies is Pirates of the Caribbean. And when Keira Knightley calls, she goes out to lecture Barbossa about the Pirates Code, and he said, the code, more like guidelines. That'd be my one bit of advice is no matter what gets presented as code, it's pretty much all guidelines.
Great advice. Question 4. If you could go back to one moment in your life, what would it be and why?
One moment in my life. I immediately jumped back to my proposal to my partner. I think I could have done it a lot better than I did. And the next moment was the moment of introducing my oldest to my youngest when he was born. That is one of the moments that is more imprinted on my brain than any other moment. So
I think you've just spoken for every single person that's ever proposed. They could go back and redo it. But there you go. Thank you very much, Tim Creasey. Question 5. Which superpower would you choose to have for a day and why?
Which superpower would I choose to have for a day and why? Probably flying. I think there's probably other ones that would give you, quote, more power. But to me, there is something absurdly majestic about being able to, by yourself, be flying up in the sky. So that's probably what I'd go for.
Amazing. We'll get you a cape as well, but you don't have to wear your pants on the outside. So you're okay.
I got a cape already for sure.
Awesome. Right, that's the end of the pod. Jeez, I can't believe it's gone so quickly, Tim. But as we always say, before we let you go, any final thoughts you want to leave our listeners with?
You know what? I'll circle it back to my base beat at the beginning. Change is hard. Stepping out of what we know, stepping into something unknown, it's hard. Change is continuous, and it's going to be the name of the game going forward. Interconnected, simultaneous change is the name of the game. And I think this is that most important, this is a fantastic but. Change success is accessible with and through our people. And I think the pandemic made it blatantly apparent. And I'm thrilled that more organizations, more project teams are really leaning into bringing humanity to the table to drive better outcomes for the project and better outcomes for their people. So really appreciate the time. Y'all are wonderful. Thank you.
No, we appreciate you, and I love it. The only constant is change. Val, a squeaky Val. Any final thoughts from you, Val?
Squeaky Val. Don't let that stick. No, Tim, it's great to have you. Obviously, every time we hear from you, it's something different, something energizing, and something for the listeners to take home. I think you really do provide practical insight with a colorful way of telling the stories, and I really appreciate your energy. Thanks for coming on again.
Yeah, thank you. My pleasure. My tagline I'm playing with right now is describing common phenomenons in uncommonly accessible ways. So describe those experiences we've all had, but in a way that we've not ever looked at them before that makes us go, I can have an impact on that. So really appreciate it. And Martin, it was great to meet you. Sorry if your mic's not working.
Yeah, great to meet you. Yeah, thanks a lot. Really enjoyed the analogies in the pod.
So, folks, there you have it. That's the end of the pod. But remember, before you go, if you like what you've heard, please help us pay it forward by sharing a link to this episode on your favorite social media. Once again, we say a massive thank you to our guest, Tim Creasey, and thank you all for listening. Till next time, we say stay safe, be disruptive, and have fun doing it. From me, Val, and Martin, it's bye for now.